Today we're looking at Britain's most infamous Millennium Project, a giant white dome built to celebrate the year 2000, costing hundreds of millions of pounds, mocked by newspapers, avoided by visitors, and somehow later rescued by becoming one of London's most successful venues. Before the O2 had concerts, restaurants, and crowds pouring out of North Greenwich Station, it was the Millennium Dome. A huge white tent on the Thames, a symbol of the future, a national celebration, and, for a while, one of the most embarrassing public projects in Britain. This is the story of the Millennium Dome, Britain's £789 million mistake. 10. The big idea in the 1990s, Britain wanted to mark the year 2000 with something huge, not just fireworks, not just a party, something permanent. Something national. The idea was to create a massive exhibition celebrating Britain's past, present, and future. It would be built on the Greenwich Peninsula in London, an area that had once been heavily industrial and polluted. That part mattered. The dome wasn't just meant to be a visitor attraction. It was supposed to help regenerate a neglected area of London and show that Britain was entering the new millennium with confidence. The project was backed under John Major's Conservative government, then carried forward by Tony Blair's new Labour government after 1997. It was meant to say one thing: Britain was modern now. But big national symbols are risky, because if people don't love them, they become very expensive jokes. 9. The building looked unforgettable whatever people thought of the project. The dome itself was hard to ignore. A vast white circular structure, 12 yellow support towers, a roof that looked like a giant festival tent dropped beside the Thames. The building was enormous. The dome was around 365 meters in diameter, with 12 support towers, often said to represent the months of the year and the hours on a clock face. It was full of symbolism. Greenwich was chosen partly because of its connection to time. The prime meridian runs through Greenwich, making it a fitting place to mark the turning of the millennium. On paper, it made sense. Time, future, Britain, a new century. Visually, it was bold. But bold buildings need a strong reason to exist. And the problem was, many people were still not sure what the dome was actually for. 8. The cost became the story at first. The dome sounded exciting. Then people started talking about the money. The total cost of the Millennium Experience project was around £789 million. With a large portion funded by national lottery money. That number became impossible to escape. Every newspaper story seemed to come back to the same question: was this really worth it? For supporters, the dome was an investment in regeneration, tourism, and national confidence. For critics, it was an expensive vanity project paid for with money that could have gone elsewhere. And this was dangerous for the project, because once the public starts seeing a building as a cost rather than an experience, every flaw becomes more annoying. A long queue feels worse, a weak exhibit feels worse, an empty space feels worse. The dome was supposed to feel like the future. Instead, many people started asking why the future was so expensive. But the real problem came when people finally went inside. 7. The exhibits confused people. The dome was not just a building. It was an exhibition split into themed zones. There was a body zone, a mind zone, a faith zone, a work zone, a money zone, a learning zone. The idea was to explore different parts of human life and Britain's future, but many visitors found it confusing. Some parts were impressive, others felt vague, corporate, or oddly forgettable. For a family day out, people wanted something clear and exciting. What they often got was a mixture of science center, theme park, school project, and government optimism. That was the core issue. The building was spectacular from the outside. But inside, people weren't always sure what they were meant to feel. Inspired, educated, entertained, patriotic? The dome tried to be everything at once. And sometimes when a project tries to be everything, it becomes difficult to describe in one sentence. That became a major problem when Britain had to be persuaded to actually visit. 6. The visitor numbers fell short. The dome needed big crowds to justify itself. Original expectations were extremely ambitious, with targets of around 12 million visitors during the year 2000, but the actual number was far lower. Around 6.5 million people visited during its opening year, a large number by normal attraction standards, but nowhere near what had been promised. That gap became devastating. If the target had been lower, 6.5 million might have sounded successful. But when people expected 12 million, it looked like failure. And the media loved that story. Empty-looking spaces, discounted tickets, families saying it wasn't worth it, politicians defending it awkwardly. The dome became a national punchline. Not because nobody went, but because not enough people went compared with the hype, and once that reputation set in, it was very hard to escape. 5. The press turned against it. The Millennium Dome had a problem every public project fears. The newspapers didn't just criticize it, they enjoyed criticizing it. It was too expensive, too vague, too New Labour, too corporate, too London-focused, too embarrassing. Whatever happened, it seemed to confirm someone's opinion that the dome was a disaster. Even before it opened, parts of the press had framed it as a symbol of government waste. After the disappointing visitor numbers, that narrative only grew stronger. And once the dome became shorthand for failure, details almost stopped mattering. People who had never visited still had an opinion. That is when a public project is in real trouble. Because it no longer has to disappoint people in person, it disappoints them in their imagination. But behind the jokes, there was a serious question. What would happen to the dome after the year 2000? 4. The one-year problem. The Millennium experience was always tied to a date. The year 2000. That gave it urgency, but it also created a problem. What happens when the year ends? A museum can keep going. A stadium has regular events. A shopping center has shops. But the dome's original purpose was built around one symbolic year. After 2000, it didn't have an obvious future. That made the huge cost feel even harder to defend. Britain had spent hundreds of millions on a building and exhibition that might lose its purpose almost immediately. Several ideas were discussed for what to do with it next. But for a time, the dome sat as a strange reminder of ambition gone wrong. A giant white structure on the skyline. Too big to ignore, too expensive to forget, too awkward to explain. But sometimes, the thing that failed as one idea can succeed as something else entirely. 3. The location finally started to matter. One of the dome's original goals was regeneration. And in that sense, the story is more complicated than simply calling it a failure. The Greenwich Peninsula had been a heavily industrial area, associated with gasworks, pollution, and underused land. Building the dome brought transport improvements, attention, and investment to the area. The Jubilee Line extension, which opened in 1999, connected North Greenwich to the London Underground network and made the site far more accessible. At the time, critics saw a lonely dome surrounded by empty space, but years later, that area would look very different. Homes, offices, restaurants, transport links, crowds. The dome itself may have struggled as an exhibition. But the regeneration story did not end in 2000. That is the twist. The project failed at being what it said it was, but it helped prepare the ground for something that came later. And that something changed everything. 2. The O2 rescue in 2005. The dome was rebranded as the O2 after a deal with the mobile phone company O2. This was the moment the building finally found its purpose, not as a national exhibition, not as a government celebration, but as an entertainment venue. Concerts, restaurants, cinemas, events, crowds. The main arena opened in 2007, and it quickly became one of the busiest music venues in the world. Suddenly, the building that had been mocked as a failure had a reason to exist. People weren't going there to experience a vague vision of the future. They were going to see Beyonce, Prince, the Rolling Stones, boxing, comedy, award shows, and nights out. That was much easier to understand. The Dome had failed as a Millennium exhibition, but as an entertainment district, it worked. And that makes its legacy stranger than most public failures. 1. The mistake that somehow survived. So, was the Millennium Dome really a failure? Yes and no. As the original Millennium experience, it fell far short of expectations. It cost around £789 million, missed its visitor targets, confused the public, and became one of the most mocked British projects of its era. But the structure survived. The area around it changed, and the building eventually became the O2, a successful venue known around the world. That is why the Dome is such a fascinating British story. It was a mistake that did not disappear. It was too big to quietly demolish, too expensive to forget, too strange to ignore. So Britain did something very British. It repurposed it. The Millennium Dome began as a symbol of the future and became a symbol of government overreach. Then, years later, it became a place people actually wanted to go. Maybe the lesson is that buildings can survive bad ideas, but reputations are harder to fix, because even now, if you remember the year 2000, you probably remember the jokes, the empty feeling, the headlines, the confusion, the sense that Britain had spent a fortune on something nobody could quite explain. And yet, if you go there today, the place is packed. That is the weirdest part of all. The Millennium Dome failed, but the building won. So now we're curious. Did you visit the Millennium Dome in 2000? Was it as bad as people said, or has time been kinder to it? Let us know in the comments.